Madam Chair, when you're ready.
You ready? Okay, if you could introduce yourself, state your name and who you represent.
Madam Chair, committee members, my name is Daryl Branson. I'm the State 911 Program Manager, bless you, from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. I would like to acknowledge that in the room here today, we do have Chairman Ackerman with the Commission here with us today, as well as a number of local 911 governing body and public safety answering point representatives, and I do appreciate their attendance. I've been told to keep this brief, so I'll do my very best. Starting, I want to start by talking about why we're here today. I'm here today to fulfill the requirements of statute that require that the PUC deliver a report to the legislature on the state of 911 annually by September 15th of every year, and then provide an in-person presentation in January. Today marks the second annual of such presentations. It requires coverage of 7 general topic areas and requires the report to be developed with stakeholder input. I will be deviating somewhat from the written version of the report in order to provide a concise and digestible presentation. However, I do want to ensure that the report was developed with input from the Commission's 911 Advisory Task Force, and a request for input was also provided to a number of statewide public safety associations as required by statute. And for the full description of the stakeholder process, please see Appendix B of the written report. Today I'm going to be talking about the current state of 911 service in Colorado, the state of our transition to next generation 911, and talking a little bit about what that is. Talk about 911 network diversity and resiliency, funding structure and status, as well as challenges facing 911 in Colorado. To start setting the stage a little bit, there are 82 primary answering points in Colorado. These are public safety answering points that take 911 calls directly from the public, as well as 4 secondary public safety answering points which take 911 calls only when transferred to them from a primary public safety answering point. These are all funded by 59 separate 911 governing bodies which receive 911 surcharge remittances directly from originating service providers. Those would be your AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, CenturyLink, all of the ones that provide the end service to the user. In Colorado, we have 100% coverage of 911 service everywhere in the state that a 911 call can be made. We also have 100% coverage for enhanced 911 for landlines everywhere in the state. We do have one county that does not yet have enhanced 911 for wireless devices or voice over internet protocol, but otherwise we do have 100% coverage of every type of 911 call that you can make from different devices. This chart shows the number of 911 calls broken down by type. It is almost all one color because that color is wireless devices making 911 calls. In 2018, statewide, about 6.4 million 911 calls were received by 911 centers across the state of Colorado, and over 90% of those calls originated from wireless devices. The other smaller slices of that pie that you see are for voice over internet protocol, landline calls, and multi-line telephone systems like switchboard systems in enterprises such as offices, schools, hospitals, etc. This slide shows the availability of text to 911 in the state of Colorado. Green means that text to 911 is available from every public safety answering point that operates in that county. Yellow means that there is a mix of public safety answering points that accept text to 911 and some that don't. And red means that there are no public safety answering points that accept text to 911. Text to 911 is an optional service. There is no state or federal mandate requiring that public safety answering points accept text to 911 calls. However, it is a very crucial service for people who are deaf or hard of hearing and can be a life-saving option for people who are in situations where speaking out loud can put them in danger, such as an active shooter situation or a domestic situation. Because of this, adoption of text to 911 has been highly encouraged by the Colorado 911 Advisory Task Force, which is an advisory body of the Commission, and we've been trying to educate local 911 agencies about the low and no-cost alternatives for providing and implementing text to 911 service. This slide depicts the coverage rate of text to 911. The slide on the right is coverage by population. I'll go back to the previous slide just shortly. You can see that most of the high population areas of the state are covered by text to 911, and as a result, over 90% of Colorado's population lives in an area where text to 911 is available. By area, it's 64.2% has text to 911 coverage, so we still have a lot of room to improve. However, I would point out that according to the FCC, only 41% of counties throughout the U.S. have text to 911 service. So we are ahead of the curve there, but we do still have some work to be done. Where 911 is going, both nationally and in the state, is to migrate to an IP-based infrastructure. Currently, the technology used to deliver 911 calls to call centers in Colorado is still based on 1960s switch-based technology with some modern IP-based technology mixed in. But the goal is to move 911, like all of telecommunications, to a fully IP-based network. This would be what this is called in 911 is Next Generation 911. That is a standards-based internet protocol network. It is more resilient and flexible than the legacy 911 network that we're on now, capable of delivering any type of data to call centers, not just voice like we can now, able to incorporate new types of communication technology as they come on the market, and able to provide a more consistent experience to callers. And I forgot to update my slide. Sorry about that. No, I didn't. Now I did. Currently, where we're at on this, we are migrating to an ESINet, an Emergency Services IP network, and that is really the first step towards implementing Next Generation 911. An ESINet is an IP network connecting all of the 911 centers in the state and delivering 911 calls to the centers via IP format. The ESINet tariff that was approved by the Commission in December of 2018 after a year-long negotiation between the parties has a migration timeline starting in this month and ending in February of 2021. And I'm happy to say that the first 911 center in Colorado to migrate to the IP network has done so. That's the city of Aurora. And all 86 PSAPs in the state are expected to be completed by the end of February of 2021. This migration, however, comes at an additional cost. Currently, under the legacy tariff, we are paying, and when I say we, I mean the 911 centers across the state are paying roughly $2.9 million to the basic emergency service provider for delivery of 911 calls to the call centers. Under the new tariff, that annual cost will be about $5.9 million. Additionally, there are approximately $4 million in non-recurring costs and project management fees that have to be paid. All of these costs are billed to the local 911 governing bodies. Currently, we do not have any state-level funding source to pay for these costs, so they are paid for by local 911 governing bodies using the 911 surcharges that are on your bills, your phone bills, and are remitted directly to the local 911 governing bodies. To help offset some of these costs, the Commission applied for a federal grant to pay for Next Generation 911 implementation. We received a $2.4 million award with a 40% matching requirement. The Commission has provided this matching requirement by designating $1.6 million out of the Colorado Performance Assurance Plan to serve as those matching funds. This means that the cost of the tariff fees for non-recurring and project management fees for the implementation of the ESINet are going to be 100% reimbursed out of this grant, although there are some miscellaneous implementation costs that will still be the responsibility of the local 911 governing body. The ongoing costs, however, are still the responsibility of local 911 governing bodies. As I mentioned earlier, the costs are roughly doubling from $2.9 million to $5.9 million per year. The unit of pricing also changed, which has resulted in a stronger impact on small public safety answering points and rural 911 governing bodies. So while every 911 governing body in the state will see an increase in their cost to CenturyLink for delivery of 911 calls, some rural 911 governing bodies will see an increase of as much as 1,600%, so a very large increase for some of the small rural 911 governing bodies. One of the reasons for this cost is that CenturyLink hadn't changed its pricing since its current tariff went into place in 2007, so some of that cost increase is catch-up. However, the unit of pricing under the legacy tariff is based on the number of 911 lines in the 911 database, while under the new tariff, the unit of pricing is how many 911 calls the call center can take at a time. And because no matter how small a 911 center is, there is a minimum number of 911 calls you should have to be able to take at a time, that is 2 for redundancy purposes, this has resulted in a larger increase in rural areas than in the urban areas. The biggest increase is for San Juan County, which is currently paying $52.50 per month for delivery of 911 calls to their call center. And under the new tariff, they will be paying close to $1,500 per month, which is a 27-fold increase. Note that the new tariff rate is based on CenturyLink's average statewide costs because commission rules require that 911 tariffs be cost-based, plus a 10.5% profit margin, which was negotiated by the parties to the settlement that was approved by the commission. 911 network diversity is an issue that is very important to the commission. Right now, well, to go back, in January of 2019, CenturyLink filed a required 911 network diversity report with the commission. This report outlined areas of the network that were lacking 911 network geographic diversity and redundancy, and also provided an estimate of the cost of relieving or improving the redundancy, the lack of redundancy in those areas. The estimated cost for making the network fully diverse and redundant, according to CenturyLink's original report, was $98 million. The commission created a working group to examine the details of this report filed by the commission, and that working group is still doing its work today. Preliminary results from that working group indicate that the actual cost for improving network diversity may be significantly less than what was originally reported by CenturyLink in their public filing. However, any improvement will require a funding mechanism, and currently the only funding mechanism that exists is the tariff. The working group will monitor the implementation of the ESINet to determine how that will affect the cost of diversification and redundancy in the 911 network. But at this time, the working group has decided against recommending to the commission that they change the tariff to pay for improved redundancy and diversity in the network, because that additional cost increase would be added on top of the additional cost that the 911 governing bodies are already trying to absorb for the implementation of the ESI network. This chart shows the number of basic emergency service outages over the last several years. Basic emergency service is the only part of the 911 call flow that the commission has clear authority over in the statute. Basic emergency service basically starts at the entrance to the basic emergency service provider network, which is CenturyLink's network, and ends where the call is delivered to the public safety answering point. So any outage that takes place prior to the call entering the CenturyLink network, such as if it's in Verizon's network or Comcast's network or Vonage's network, any outage that takes place in that part of the network or after it's delivered to the call center is not included in this chart. Comparison data from other states is generally unavailable, so it's not possible to say how this compares to the number of outages experienced nationally or even compared to our own neighbors. However, we have been seeing an increase in the raw number of core 911 system outages statewide, and as you can see from the chart, that number has roughly doubled over only 3 years, and that is a concerning statistic. However, we do expect this number to drop significantly with the implementation of the Emergency Services IP network, which I mentioned earlier has already started and will be continuing over the next year and 1 month. Partly because of this increase in outages, the 911 Advisory Task Force of the Commission has begun conducting special investigations into outages that meet specific threshold criteria to look for commonalities. CenturyLink has been cooperative with these investigations and may result in recommendations to the Commission. In the meantime, the investigations are helping to identify best practices for reducing the likelihood of future outages or mitigating their impact. Turning to funding.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Certainly.
So what did that mean? So CenturyLink has been cooperative with these investigations, therefore it may result in recommendations to the commission? How are those two sentences connected?
Madam Chair and
If they
committee
would not
members,
have been
I kind of blended
cooperative?
those two sentences together, but they are two separate thoughts. CenturyLink has been cooperative with these investigations, period, and these investigations may result in recommendations to the Commission. I apologize for that.
No, Representative Arndt is reading my mind, and
Yeah.
she's going to ask a follow-up question.
Sorry, that's why we're laughing, because we did this other day on Smart Act. We're like, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not texting or anything. What investigations?
Yes.
Madam Chair, Representative Arndt, so there are a number of threshold or a number of criteria that have been set up by the outage committee of the 911 Advisory Task Force to trigger a special investigation if the outage is over 4 hours in duration, if it affects multiple public safety answering points, if there's any disagreement between the public safety answering points or CenturyLink as to what happened during the outage, and several other criteria. And those are the criteria that they're using to determine which investigations they're doing.
Thank you. Representative Arndt, follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So can we get a copy of those investigations and the outcomes? I'm just considered, we heard the broadband bill a year or two ago, and I'm always concerned. So when we take taxpayer dollar and subsidize private sector, those to me are some of the most precious resources we have, right? So public money going to private sector, not public money going to public schools or public roads or anything, public going to private sector. I am concerned that there's investigations, and I'd like to know sort of the amount, the number, how they compare with other companies. I don't know if it's related, but I saw there was a lawsuit that the government won this year against CenturyLink, and I just would like to know more. Is it possible to have a follow-up on that to this committee?
Mr. Branson.
Madam Chair, Representative Arndt, yes, those reports are being filed in a public proceeding with the Commission. So they are publicly available, and I can make them available. I can send copies to these committees as well.
That's all. Thank you.
I will state that, however, that the outage committee of the 911 Advisory Task Force just recently started doing this. So there are only 2 completed investigations in there right now, and we have 2 ongoing. So there's not a lot of information in there yet.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, committee members, continuing, the chart that you see on the screen right now is emergency telephone charges over time. This is the average statewide emergency telephone charge. Remember, these are set locally by local 911 governing bodies. If they want to go above 70 cents or need to go above 70 cents, they have to apply for permission from the Colorado Public Utilities Commission. But because they are set locally, they range everywhere from 50 cents at the low end to, we just approved one for $2.76, and we have another one that was just recently approved for $3 that has not gone into effect yet. As of right now, the average statewide, which is shown by the blue line, is at $1.20. The red line shows what 70 cents would be today if it had been adjusted for inflation since 1990, because 1990 is the year that 70-cent threshold for requiring approval from the Commission was put into place. That number is $1.37 as of last year. It's a little subtle, but if you can also see, if you look, that the 2 lines, the red line and the blue line, are somewhat converging. That's because the costs for providing 911 service are outstripping inflation, and therefore the 911 governing bodies are applying for surcharge increases that at a rate that is going a little bit faster than inflation itself.
Thank you. Representative McKean.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think this is the right place for this question, but you always think it's the right place and you find out it's not. So we're talking about, as Representative Arndt said, public money, but really this is a surcharge that you're putting on everybody's phone, and then they pay it, and the government ends up being kind of the pass-through. And so we're having this larger talk about broadband, and we know that some of the points of entry are changing for 911 and other kinds of emergency services. So what is the extent to the discussions that the PUC and their 911 side is having with the discussion of how we extend broadband out in this state, and how can we co-locate facilities, and also how can we co-use facilities when we're talking about different kinds of interconnection, whether it be on the broadband data side or 911? How much are those conversations taking place, and what's the fruit of those conversations?
Mr. Branson.
Madam Chair, Representative McKean, those conversations are happening mostly in parallel and not really intermingling. And the reason for that is simply because of how 911 calls are delivered in Colorado is delivered via a tariff. So there's one company that's responsible for delivering 911 calls. So when you start talking about how to leverage other companies' facilities in order to provide additional diversity and redundancy, some of those conversations have been had in that 911 diversity working group that I talked about earlier. But because they are not part of that tariff, which allows for the purchase of 911 call delivery, they haven't been part of the larger conversation. Although I do believe that that is a topic that's going to be broached more in the future as basically the commingling of facilities becomes more common.
Follow-up, Representative McKean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not really a follow-up. The future is right now. And this is, I think, one of the concerns that a lot of us have when we start digging into these is that not to step on anybody's toes, but these are the conversations that just simply have to happen. Because if what we're going to do is try to do two things in parallel, what we're really doing is just not utilizing, not leveraging the resources that we have to the best ability we can. So just my encouragement that they talk. That would be great.
Mr. Branson.
Madam Chair, committee members, just a quick follow-up on that. So I don't want to leave the impression that no amount of collaboration is being done between the carriers right now. I know that CenturyLink utilizes third-party carriers for a lot of its network. My only comment was that because of how the tariff works, we don't necessarily have a lot of ability to require CenturyLink to do so.
Follow-up, Representative McKean.
And truly, just I wasn't trying to impugn where you go. Just I think that we're really in a paradigm shift about this, and so I appreciate all those conversations. I think it is important just to have them. And yes, you're sort of boxed in by what you've got.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Branson.
Madam Chair, committee members, this second to last slide is a scatter chart, which may be a little bit difficult to read on the wall for the people in the audience. But this scatter chart shows the local 911 surcharge rate or emergency telephone charge versus the population that each 911 governing body serves. And the reason why I included this today is to show you that you see where $1.50 is, which is pretty much in the middle of the horizontal line. Every 911 authority above $1.50 in the state of Colorado has a very low population. So while living in a low population area does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to have a high 911 surcharge rate, the local or the rural areas of the state of Colorado are bearing the brunt of the higher surcharge rates that do exist. And that's the point I wanted to try to show with this particular slide. Finally, I forgot I had an animation here. Finally, I wanted to talk about some challenges that are facing 911 in the state of Colorado. The first one is local funding being insufficient to cover the costs of 911 going into the future. As I mentioned earlier, the costs for 911 call delivery in the ESI net are going to be roughly double what they are now, and that is really just the start of the implementation of Next Generation 911. That is the foundation upon which other features and services will be added to turn the ESI net into full Next Generation 911, and each one of those services and features will cost additional money. Additionally, I mentioned that, as I just mentioned, there is an economies of scale involved with 911 in that it costs a lot more to provide 911 service in rural areas per person than it does in urban areas. We have single points of failure in the 911 network, as I mentioned earlier, discussing 911 network diversity. And as I mentioned, there are solutions to these problems, but they require funding, and currently the only funding mechanism that we have available to us is to raise the tariff rate for basic emergency service that the local 911 governing bodies have to pay. And that would be on top of the increases that they're already getting ready to pay for the ESI net implementation. We lack funding accountability in Colorado. And that statute gives audit authority to local 911 governing bodies at their own expense to audit carriers to see if they are remitting what they're supposed to be remitting for emergency telephone charges. However, because most 911 governing bodies in Colorado are fairly small, no full 911 surcharge remittance audit has ever been conducted statewide of a carrier, and no audit has ever been done of all of the carriers remitting 911 surcharges in the state. We have no minimum training standards in Colorado for public safety telecommunicators. We are one of only 12 or 15, depending on which source you look at, states that have no minimum training standards for public safety telecommunicators, which are the personnel who take 911 calls and dispatch them. Most PSAPs, I will say, have an excellent training program, but the lack of a standard means that there is no consistency necessarily from one service area to the next. Similarly, we have no minimum PSAP performance and service standards. Some public safety answering points in Colorado have only one telecommunicator on duty at a time. We have no way of knowing how many public safety answering points in Colorado are meeting national standards regarding call answering times because there is no reporting requirement for public safety answering points. And finally, we have no requirements for emergency medical dispatch pre-arrival instructions or quality assurance. There is no consistency regarding which medical protocols are being used from one public safety answering point to another, and some public safety answering points provide no medical pre-arrival instructions at all. If they do provide medical pre-arrival instructions, there is no consistency regarding whether they perform quality assurance on those processes. Again, I want to stress that most PSAPs are doing excellent work regarding medical pre-arrival instructions, but we lack consistency in this area due to a lack of standards. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
You don't want to end on a high note? Questions, committee members? Okay, well, that was very helpful. You gave us quite a bit to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, the Joint Business Committee will adjourn. Senator Williams, do you want to talk about where the Senate is going?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Senate Business, Labor, and Technology Committee will meet immediately after this. We will meet in our regular meeting room in room 354. We have 2 bills up today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And House Business Affairs and Labor Committee will meet in this room. We will adjourn for just a moment, and then we will come back again. And we will have 2 sunset hearings. So with that, Joint Business Committee will adjourn.